content over everything.
The show's broadcast at 6:30 on 104.4 Resonance FM. You come and see this one every Sunday afternoon. My name is Heiko. I'll be speaking about 25 minutes or so. Good afternoon. How are you?
After 27 minutes, so...
Yeah, also that'll be fine. I can try and finish up, or 25 maybe, and I'll have a couple of minutes to finish up no matter what where things have gone. Where should we begin? I sometimes come here and make a big speech, but I don't really have, every week I don't prepare that, because in my experience, well, one is I haven't had time to do that. Two, it's not really the way I work normally at Speaker's Corner. I try to let the discussion flow a little bit, unless I've got a specific thing I want to talk about that particular week. So that's why the present format. Also, because I'm making a radio show today, it's going to be truncated to around 25 minutes or so, so I can knock out the radio show and send it off, because it has to be broadcast this afternoon. I have to get it in on time. Are there any questions or contributions from the audience? James, how would you like to start us off and give us direction? You wouldn't.
My mind's a bit of a blank today.
Good, I'm a little bit like that as well. Never mind.
In fact, I've been discussing with the flat earthers.
Is that a good discussion?
Pointless.
Did you see on their website of the Flat Earth Society, they said we have supporters all around the globe.
Is that on their website?
Yes, on there. I saw it quoted meme from someone. I'm not sure if it's 100% true. Maybe it is. I think it is actually. Do you have anything you'd like to contribute today?
Yes, I was going to ask you, there's been some interesting developments since Trump took over, and one of the most interesting, I thought, is this contradiction between America and the rest of the world now, which I think in a sort of funny way is a good thing. The capitalist system in America has decided to become isolationist and put up these tariff barriers against the rest of the world, and of course the rest of the world will reply in kind. This, I think, could be a good thing, because it means that the West are no longer united for war in Middle East and Eastern Europe, and they're going to be starting to fight amongst themselves.
Is that a good thing?
Well, I think it is a good thing in a way, because it means that the American dominance, imperialist America's dominance, will perhaps be on a wane now, because they will not be getting the support they have had in the past from Europe in particular.
I mean, the enormous preponderance of the United States after the Second World War on a world scale is what shaped the second half of the 20th century as the American century, and up until today. And if you like, it's the relative decline of the United States vis-a-vis other powers as a total production of world GDP, the percentage of world trade and so on, that has undermined the position of America as the leading imperial country. Having said that, the economic element, it's still by far the largest economy in the world. I mean, if you take GDP rather than purchasing power parity, if you take actual GDP. And America, of course, has the dominance of world trade because it has the control of the shipping lanes. And the American Navy dominates the world shipping lanes. It was like in Britain, 1926, when Britain lost its I think it was called the Naval Standard or something like that, where every Britain's shipping had to be at least twice the size of everybody else. The United States maintains a dominance in world military affairs. And because of that, that's why Trump feels relatively confident to mess up the existing order, if you like. An existing order that, to be fair, is breaking down internationally in any case. And therefore, Trump is a phenomena, an expression of that crisis, the contradiction between the declining position of America economically and the continued strength of America as a global hegemon, if you like, which retains its efficacy. And therefore, the Americans think that by reinstating, if you like, their power, by reasserting blunt power, that they will be able to reorder the world to some degree, or to a significant degree, to their liking. Some of it's bluster, some of it's real. But there certainly seems to be, I think you indicated that, a lot of support amongst American capitalists for the policies being carried out by Trump. And the bluster about, you know, the showmanship, the con man, the snake oil seller that is Donald Trump, is, if you like, a sideline to the game being played on a world scale about maintaining and reinvigorating American dominance. And American dominance ultimately will boil down to a weakening of Japan and a weakening of Europe. That essentially is the means by which America can reassert its position, because Europe, of course, in theory, if the European Union were a united force, it would be far stronger than the United States of America. And of course, if Germany and Russia came together, then Germany and Russia could be a very strong power, enormous economic might, backed by resources from from Eastern Europe to the Urals. I haven't mentioned China because China is not really engaged at present on a large scale economically in conflict with America. I don't believe that is the case, contrary to what they're making out. China does have a relationship with America, a very strong relationship with America economically, but China, contrary to what many people believe, is not a dependent state relying upon trade with America. Primarily, China's economic dynamics are internal. Having said that, it's reached a point where the Chinese are attempting, but this is a 10, 15, 20-year project, to lay the foundations for a global network of trade which bypasses the shipping lanes dominated by American military, American Navy, American Air Force. I think 2/3 of world military in the shipping lanes is dominated by America. And the Chinese have got, like, what is it? I think it's one aircraft carrier, maybe two now, one, and that's a second-hand one bought from the Ukrainians.
But aren't the Chinese making a line, a train line or some communication line from China all the way through to Europe?
Now there are many 80 different countries encompassing 60% of the world are engaged or interconnected with the initiative called the Belt and Road. Now, you've probably heard of it. Belt and Road basically means shipping lanes to facilitate Chinese trade with the world, road networks and rail networks connecting the land masses of the world on a gigantesque scale. So, for example, plans have been mooted, and they are mooted, by the way, not concrete. Plans have been mooted for railway lines connecting, for example, Great Britain with China, whereby you'd be brought from Beijing to London in 72 hours. Now, these are mooted plans. The plan was originally to have this railroad functioning by 2026. However, and for example in Africa, when Wen Jiabao, the former premier, went to Africa, I think it was 2015, or no, maybe a little earlier, 2012. He went to Africa and he said, we will connect every city in Africa of over 500,000 people by high-speed rail, which would make, if it was true, would make the rail infrastructure of Africa superior to the rail infrastructure of Europe. But of course, the logistical problems of doing that are that even though the Chinese can do this inside China, the ability to do it in Africa or in other countries like, I say, the Beijing-London line, the ability to do that requires the agreement of 26 different countries. And in Africa requires the agreement of governments, political organizations, local people, and so on. And so the consequence of that is what the Chinese can do in China cannot necessarily be done elsewhere in the world. Some of these Belt and Road programs will be a success, but in the meantime, and even perhaps quite a while after that, there will still be American domination of the seas. And American dominance of the seas, that's why all this discussion about the Spratly Islands, about the buildings or the naval bases that China is building in the South China Sea and so on. Because the Americans want to ensure that the world shipping and trade is still under their dominance, because 2/3 of world trade is organized in dollars. And therefore, the dollar world, in other words, American dominance, the shipping lanes, in other words, controlling the flow of goods, is inextricably connected to American interests. And so there is the embryo of a sharp conflict between America and China. But China remains, for the moment, focused on its internal politics. And if Belt and Road fails to develop adequately in, let's say, instead of 80 countries and 60% of the world, perhaps it comes to incorporate by 2025, 2026, maybe 30% of the world. It's not quite the achievement they're seeking, but it will be sufficient, in my opinion, to maintain a steady rate of growth in China, which is due, as my doctoral thesis just said, which is due to the dominance of public ownership in the economy. And that's a lesson for Western Europe and America, is that the reason why China has grown at the fastest rate of any country in world history and has improved the lives of hundreds of millions of people. They talk about migration in Europe, the terrible migration problem. You know, the Italians, their new government declared we cannot have these migrants arriving by ship. 600 people is too many, the boat is already full, and therefore they should either be shipped back to Libya or dropped in the sea or something of that. I mean, what else are they supposed to do? So eventually they ended up in Spain. Now, a country that cannot take 600 arrivals per day is not seriously a strong economy. I mean, here's a country that's in crisis. And if you go to a place like Rome and you wander around the streets of Rome or Naples, you will see thousands and thousands of people sleeping on the streets. Not even like London. They are eking out an existence in the underbelly of society, excluded from society, sleeping in boxes all around, collecting the rubbish from the rubbish bins and selling it on the streets. That's daily life for the migrants who arrive in Europe. What we should be doing in that respect, it's clear differentiation between what's happening in China and what's happening in Europe. Because in China, 17 million new people are born every year. 300 million people, 300 million, have moved from the countryside to the cities. Just as big a gap and as big a change in life experience as to move from Africa as a poor person to Europe. That's all that is. It's the natural process of human migration. I was reading a book this morning, published by Neil McGregor, the former director of the British Museum. And in there he discusses the 100 most important objects in human history. Object number 2 is a flint, a piece of rock picked up from the ground and hit with another flint to make a sharp edge. And with this sharp edge, early hominids lived for millions of years with a sharp edge tool. And with that sharp edge tool, they could travel the world, just like birds and bees, just like migrating animals. They could move around the world because they had an instrument to free them from their physical weakness, vis-a-vis a lion, a tiger, a hunting animal, vis-a-vis animals with strong protection. Hominids only have weak skins. And therefore, the next phase of development was to chip away at the rock and form a hand axe. And the hand axe is described in this object number 3 in the British Museum's book as the passport to the world. It was the mechanism by which humanity conquered the earth. No passports, no biometrics, no nation states. This is how we became what we are. Not by killing each other, but by establishing our conquest over nature, shaping the world.
Nature has always been there. It's
Well,
conquering each other.
well, I ask you this. Conquering each other comes from this. I'll talk about that in a second. Once we had the ability to produce over and above what the community required, but we didn't have the ability to produce enough for everyone to live in plenty, some people emerged as rulers over others. Those who commanded the surplus over and above what was required by the people acquired a status of a new class, a ruling class. But of course, at a certain, this is the beauty about Karl Marx. He explained at a certain stage in human development, people are able to produce from starting with the hand axe, reaching to nuclear rockets and mobile phones and video cameras and streaming technologies, biomedicine, nanotechnology, all the means to solve health, education, welfare questions worldwide, housing questions, for the mass of the people. My friend, I said all the means to solve the problems of humanity around the world, the technical level of development of humanity. That's what I was discussing.
So why do you still have poverty and people dying of starvation in the world?
Because of the structure of power, where because all, behind it all, a building over there. That building has remained half empty since it was built in the late 1990s. Half empty. Next to it is another building. That building there with a balcony, that has been empty since I started speaking, or just after I started speaking in Speaker's Corner 32 years ago. And so don't tell me that the resources, even on a minimal level, visible before our eyes, are not there. They are there. In London alone, there is, according to a Conservative Party, one of the leading Conservative Party think tanks, there are in London enough empty properties, commercial, not being used, to house to build 400,000 housing units. No homelessness. And yet, nothing is done in this direction. And it is because there are behind these sacred walls a key to the door. Security guards. People, you can see it at every level. I went to a club last night, there's a lot of bouncers on the door. Then this guy's watching over you. You go to a bothersome bounce on the door. You go to down Bond Street. I walked here past Bond Street this morning. They've got two guys on the door with an earphone. There's one young lady working in there, and the more expensive the goods are, the less goods they put in the shop. Ridiculous. You'd have 3 pairs of shoes, 2 bouncers, and 1 beautiful girl to sell a pair of shoes. Absolutely insane. And yet, the insanity that we are born into, that we see around us, that is everywhere, appears natural and normal. It is not natural and normal. Nothing we see around us is natural and normal. They are creations of the human hand and the human brain, but they are distorted to serve the interests of those who have the power over the tools. That's why I spoke about the hand axe. Before we had passports, nations, countries, laws, governments, the hand axe was the instrument of liberation. And so too, the mechanism and instrument of liberation today is for the people who produce the wealth of the world by their brains, by their hands, by their culture, by their creativity. And yes, every human being is replete with culture, creativity, ability to give, ability to add, ability to advance, the condition of all humanity. And therefore, when they talk to you about borders, nations, countries, stopping the foreigners, limiting the boat, they are lying to you. because the world is a world entity. It has been a global entity for millions of years. It is the power of the elite who own and control access to resources, and which then gives them power over humanity, that leads to the present chaos we have in the world. That is why taking control of your lives means taking control of your hands and your brains, and collectively uniting together with all those others around the planet who use their hands and their brains, and thereby undermining the idea that it is the nation, that's your status, that's your authority, undermining that and creating a world of peace, of plenty, of freedom, and of universal rights for humanity, whereby the people take control of the resources. The largest companies, the banks, they're not some magical instrument with geniuses running them. They are instruments to extract from you wealth for them. And when they've got that wealth, what do? There are 8 people in the world today own more wealth than half of the world. 8 people. Back in 1998, it was 365. Now it's 8. There are 140 companies, according to a study by some Swiss scientists, Vitalian et al., published in New Scientist. 140 companies control 40% of world trade, most of them financial. In other words, banks, financial speculators. These are merely instruments whereby the wealth that we produce, that does not go to us, goes into the hands of those who control us. So your past labour, your dead labour, as Marx said, controls your living labour. Your own productive action is turned into an instrument to control and dominate you. The dead control the living. The past labour controls the present labour. And the accumulation of wealth over millions of years, since we first picked up a flint and shaped nature to serve our needs, all that wealth has been transferred to a tiny minority. That must, that can, and that will end. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Content over everything. From your melanin.
Man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. Listen.
We do not include Surah Fatiha to be the first, Surah Fatiha, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim to be the first verse. And this was the belief of the Ahlul Bayt, to believe Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim was part of the Quran, and it was the belief of Ali ibn Abi Talib. The next point is when it comes to the issue of Salah. The Ahlul Bayt used to read Hayya ala khair al-amal, okay? Whereas you guys, with the Sunni brothers, they read Hayya ala